Hi Booktube, it's Amy. I apologize for the angle. I am tripodless today, but I wanted to do a quick book haul and show off the books that I picked up here in Kitchener-Waterloo yesterday at the KW bookstore. And I shared some pictures on Instagram, so if you've seen those, you've already seen the books, but I'll talk a bit more about what exactly these books are. So here's one that I was reading outdoors today, and I'm hoping with my sun hat and sunscreen I escaped getting burnt. But I was outdoors reading this. Edith Deal's Bookbinding, Its Background and Technique, 2 volumes bound in one. This is a bit of an older, hefty paperback. The copyright says 1946. This is a revised edition from 1980, and you know, 1980 was still quite a while ago. So some of the details in terms of where bookbinding has gone in the contemporary years are going to be a bit off here. But I am enjoying so far reading about the history of bookbinding, and it looks like we're going to have a glossary in here and some great chapters on craftsmanship and the craft and the mechanics of bookbinding, which I'm quite interested to dig into. And scrap paper I was using as a bookmark. So next up I have a older edition of J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan and Wendy and Margaret Ogilvy. So this is what I assume was probably part of a set with both combined. The boards are a little bit faded in spots. Spine is hard to read, but I was pleased to add an early edition of Peter Pan and Wendy to my J.M. Barrie collection, and this is from 1915. There's our title page and frontispiece. And this was only $6. So despite the speckling on the front board and the faded spine, I thought it was worth it for the $6 to add it to my collection. Sorry, not $6, $8. The other books were $6. And we do have a nice dedication in here. Many happy returns, December 28th, 1916. So I would guess that this was maybe a Christmas gift or perhaps a going away present. But it's quite fun to come across a dedication in the front of a book. And so as I said, we have Peter Pan and Wendy and Margaret Ogilvy. And it's not an expensive edition, hence the $8 price tag, but we do have some illustrations in here. These, however, not the illustrations that you would hope to have in an older edition of Peter Pan and Wendy, but there are illustrations all the same. And I believe, yep, these illustrations are by F.D. Bedford. Peter Pan and Wendy, or rather Peter and Wendy, first published in 1911. That's the copyright. So even though this is 1916 and an early edition, it is, you know, just a few years after the publication of the work Peter and Wendy. So it's an early edition, perhaps not one of the most desirable early editions, but most of the early editions of Peter and Wendy are extremely expensive, and well, by extremely expensive, I mean into the hundreds of dollars, perhaps even thousands of dollars, depending on the edition. Too pricey for my collection at this point. But it is great to be able to add an edition of any kind that isn't a recent printing into my collection, because that's sort of what I was missing. I have some reproductions of early editions of Peter Pan and Wendy, but I didn't have an early edition at all. And Peter and Wendy, this is the text that is most commonly published in the novel format as Peter Pan, just for reference there. Then here's a fun book. This is the English Lake District, a thorough guide. And I don't know about the publication date on this one. I would guess it is from the early 20th century, but the great thing about it is throughout the book there are these fold out maps. And so I'll just gently gently fold that out. I won't fold out all the maps in the book, but there are maybe a dozen maps throughout this book, along with descriptions of the landscapes, of walks, of tours. For instance, here we have Windermere and Bowness. There's a map that folds out, and we have banks, bathing house, boats, bohls, churches, distances. Things close early on Thursday, fishing. And there's a nice ribbon bookmark in here. And it is well thumbed and well read, to the point where I would guess that either we had an armchair reader who really wanted to travel to the Lake District in England, or this was actually in the hands of someone who did indeed go to the Lake District. And it does seem to be geared towards a Western, North American audience, talking about the kind of things that perhaps a European or an English audience would already know, but that Americans would not. So I would guess it was probably marketed, even though it's published in London, it was probably marketed to Americans. And the spelling throughout also indicates that it was marketed for Americans, despite being published in London. Then we have Essays in Criticism, second series by Arnold. This nice deep red edition. Once again, this one was $8. The English Lake District was $6. This is a 1930 printing from the Macmillan Company. And I do like to dip into a collection of essays every now and then. These essays were first published in 1888. And we have a table of contents, which is what piqued my interest here. An essay on the study of poetry, Milton, Thomas Gray, John Keats, Wordsworth, Byron, Shelley, Leo Tolstoy, and Emile, which I'm not familiar with that final essay. But these perhaps will make good reading for a train journey at some point. Then we have a Penguin Classics paperback here by Francois Rabelais. He's an author that I've seen come up in several other things that I've read, but I've never thought about reading him for myself until I came across this in the bookstore and decided for $5 I would pick it up. So this is Gargantua and Tattoo Girl. Pardon my pronunciation there. But this author was a Franciscan monk who lived between 1494 and 1553. So this is quite an older work, but I thought Penguin Classics paperback would be a good way to introduce myself to the work of this particular author. And the back doesn't tell me anything about the content of the book. It rather just talks about the brilliancy of the author and refers to it as a robust parody conceived and executed on an epic scale, translated by J.M. Cohen. So there's that. Next up, we have an interesting little find here. This is Social Pictorial Satire by George du Maurier, in this beautiful gold and red binding here. Spine is a little bit faded. There is some discoloration, some foxing throughout, but I don't mind. This was the most expensive of the books that I got yesterday. This was $15. But here is our title page and frontispiece. I haven't taken the time to decipher the Roman numerals to figure out the publication date, but I do believe once again, oh no, sorry, if we flip to the copyright page here, 1898, I was about to say early 20th century, late 19th century, but we do have a date there in Roman numerals. List of illustrations here, but this book appears to be by a illustrator, by what we would nowadays, I think, call a cartoonist. but it appears to be a collection of chapters or essays all about satire through images, so about what we would perhaps call social or political cartoons. Social pictorial satire, and we do have some interesting illustrations here. A stroke of business. Village Hampton, who with dauntless breast has undertaken for sixpence to keep off the other boys. If any of your wants to see what were a panton of it's half a penny a head, but you mustn't make no remarks. So this is a reproduction of something from Punch, May 4th, 1867. And there is a man painting in the distance. We have the snowstorm from January 1867. It's a no use your calling me sir. Got such a job with these ere two as'll last me a fortnight. And so yeah, it appears to be the memoirs of a cartoonist. Up next I have a collection of prefaces and introductions by W. Somerset Maugham. I do have most of Maugham's works on my shelf, and this book was actually in the bookstore the last time I was there about a year ago, and it was still there, so I thought that was a sign that I should buy it. $8. There's our title page there. All of the copyrights are between 1933 and 1963, and the book itself was published in 63. And so it is prefaces and introductions from a number of his works, I believe. Concerning Mr. Maugham's own works, concerning the works of other writers. So he would have written prefaces and introductions for his own works, but also a few introductions for the works of other writers who would have asked, or the publisher would have asked him to write on that particular work. So that's that. And we have one more here, which was perhaps the best find. This one was $6. From Gretna Green to Land's End, A Literary Journey in England, Catherine Lee Bates. And it's got this beautiful gold cover here. So it is a travel memoir, but also a travel guide of sorts. The author walks us through her own journey through various areas of England, but also points out the sort of things that we would want to see ourselves if we were also traveling through those areas. And I had a fun experience yesterday when I sat down to begin reading it. I'm just maybe a third of the way through, quarter to a third of the way through. But I got to page 13 and I realized that the book had unopened pages, which means that it had never properly been cut open to be read. So back in the day, when you would buy a book, perhaps the pages wouldn't be opened. They would still sort of be connected where they had been folded to make the book. So for instance, when a book is made, multiple pages are printed onto one big sheet of paper that is then folded up and bound together. And in order to read the book, you have to open the pages or cut in certain places to sort of release the individual pages. I'm not sure if that's the best explanation, but this book had obviously never been read because the pages hadn't been opened, and so I had to pause in my reading, come inside and borrow an X-Acto knife to gently cut open each of the pages. And this is an experience that I've had before with a J.M. Barrie book that I bought. But it's always fun to realize that you are really the first reader of such an old book. And this book is from 1908. We have the title page here protected by tissue, and the frontispiece is Garden of Wordsworth's Home at Cockermouth. Just pull back the tissue guard to better show the frontispiece. And you know, it's not the most exciting reading in the world, but it is a mildly amusing book to read out of doors, which is exactly what I did yesterday. And we do have some nice illustrations throughout. So we have the rush bearing at Grasmere. I greatly enjoyed reading all about rush bearings and exactly what they are and why they're done. And this wonderful description of these children getting their squares of gingerbread at the church during the rush bearing. And so far she's taken us through the border, the rush bearing, the Lake Country, and now we are into a group of industrial counties in which she's talking about Lancashire and Manchester. And the great thing is there is a map at the front of the book, or somewhere near the front of the book. Let me find this map. There it is. Oh, now I've lost it again. There is a map. I just need to find it. There we go. There is a map, which is great for those of us Canadian and American readers who are not intimately familiar with where exactly all the cities, towns, and districts are in England. But once again, I think, well, I know this book is geared towards a North American audience because the author herself specifically talks about being an American abroad. And I'm quite enjoying it. And it finally becomes the third book, well, along with the book on the Lake Districts, the third and fourth book in the collection of early 20th century travel books that I've started to collect. I've got a book called The Romance of Northumberland, which I picked up about 2.5 years ago. And I've got a book on Canadian houses of romance, all from the early 20th century. And it's sort of been my intention to begin to collect some more travel books, travel memoirs that would fit in with that. And so this is a great third addition to that very, very tiny collection that is hardly started yet, hardly considered a collection. But I find it makes very enjoyable, relaxing armchair reading, just to have something you can dive into and experience someone's perspective of what it was like to visit certain places and what the scenery was like and what the people were like, what the weather was like. It's not riveting reading, but as I said, it makes for a nice armchair evening reading. So those are the books I picked up. And I think I'm about to be interrupted here, so I'll call it a day. I hope you're all doing well, and I'll see you again soon.